ready. And just raise a hand if you've got a question to ask, and I'll try and notice you. And Daisy and Emily will also just kind of try and help make sure we get through as many as we can. If we don't get to you, then apologies, but I guess you can always email something in. Okay, so if you're normally a person who stays quiet in this sort of things, then I would encourage you to say what your point is and that what needs to be said. Trust if you've got a question. If you're normally a person who can happily talk, then I'd also encourage you to just take a moment and think about the message you want to convey and speak with real intention. And for everyone else, if you haven't got a question, then listen with attention. And this means focusing your attention on the person who's talking rather than maybe figuring out what you're going to say later. And if you may well find then that somebody else says something that adds insight to the thing that you wanted to say anyway. So this is our opportunity to really find the thread in what it is that we're all going to share together and the journey we're going to go on together. So, first question, please.
My name's Philip Marthwick. I've come over from Dorchester for this evening. I actually come from Poole originally, but I'm now active in contesting some of the issues that have been raised in South Dorset, particularly Weymouth and Portland. Just a couple of very brief comments before a question. In Weymouth and Portland, in 2017, the government statistics revealed that we had the lowest wages in the whole of the UK. South Dorset, in the recent parliamentary constituency survey, came 533rd out of 533 English constituencies for social mobility. Our children are at the absolute baseline. We have extremes of inequality. For those who know Weymouth, there's an area called Melcombe in the town centre, close to another area called Preston. The male life expectancy in Melcombe is 10 years less than more prosperous Preston, which is just a couple of hundred yards away. And I know some of these same measures apply to parts of Poole and Bournemouth. So these issues for Dorset, of course we all know, people think about Dorset as, green and pleasant land and Jurassic Coast and so on. These issues are of really profound importance for us, I think, and I very much thank the organisers and Vonda for her introduction. But I must get to the question, of course, which is this. Of course we have need for various forms of local action, and we're doing our best in South Dorset to raise these issues and organise around them. But there's a broader issue. I was slightly taken aback, in a way, by the very meaningful but radical tone of what Vonda has said to us. How does the Equality Trust anticipate challenging our dominant decision makers, who for the last 30 years or so have pursued policies which, as you rightly say, have been political choices, which have largely created this situation? So what is the approach of the Equality Trust to the idea of formulating alternatives which influence our key, I believe, zealous neoliberal decision makers? What do we do about it? Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, at a national level, we engage very much with national politicians. But I think what we're finding increasingly is obviously there's been very little bandwidth for anything other than the B word, which I will not mention. What we found is that it's really been local councils and devolved areas, so areas that have mayors, where we can get more change. We don't have the socio-economic duty, but Newcastle City Council has decided to implement something similar. So we're working in those areas where we can, and also, of course, it's our local groups that are doing a lot of this work at local level. So it's about talking to your MPs, talking to your local representatives as well. And when we have the groundswell of what you're doing, and we have together with the evidence and the data that we have, together with public opinion polls, recently IPPR released a report that released a poll that said that 57% of people thought that the economy was rigged in favour of rich people or big business. The tide is beginning to turn, and a lot of the work we still have to do is in raising awareness and saying it's not just about poverty. We have not solved poverty; it's getting worse. Unless we tackle inequality, we tackle the top, whether that's power, whether that's the economic system, whether it's corporate governance, we will not solve the things that we're trying to solve. And if we keep working in silos, if we look at mental health here, youth crime here, housing here, if we don't see that as a holistic issue, that all of these things are interlinked, then we all need to feel safe, secure in good jobs, able to put food on the table, able to send our kids to decent schools, then none of the economic outcomes that even these people want are ever going to happen.
I think I'll pass on.
Okay, next question then, please.
You mentioned about fee-paying schools, and you were suggesting quite bluntly that was causing inequality. I think maybe, obviously, you get into the common denominator argument about that. Various UK governments, when class sizes have dropped, the infrastructure's in place, but instead of letting class sizes drop to the levels that are in independent schools, they never do it, and that doesn't matter which political party's in power. So maybe I can see why you think that, but maybe it's the other way round. Maybe the public sector can learn from the private schools, and I'll give you just one sort of health analogy, if you like. As I understand it, there are some public schools where the kids don't really do a lot in the way of homework outside of the school, and obviously those schools also concentrate on physical well-being, getting you playing games or whatever. So yeah, so I'd say it's not necessarily so that it's the private schools that are causing the problem. It might be something else. Yeah.
Can you clarify the question, please?
Well, the question is that okay, yeah, all right. Well, do you think that fee-paying schools are causing inequality?
And I have to declare something here. I went to an independent girls' school on a scholarship as a working class kid, and my mother did before me. There are many, many, many levels on which we could discuss this. One thing I will say is that the evidence shows that this is a key driver of inequality, because in the same way as with grammar schools, you're almost ghettoising children. So you have a whole bunch of rich or middle class children in one school, and that means you have a PTA that can raise £40,000-50,000 a year, you have better facilities, you have a whole range of opportunities that these middle class parents can provide to their children. What we're seeing happening is, even in the state sector, that parents are picking out the good state schools, and they're moving, they're buying houses, they're renting houses, they're doing every trick in the book, and believe me, I have a school-age son, so I have experienced a lot of this, to get into those schools. What happens then is that you have the lower-class state schools, where people can't afford to go, where it's just their local school at the end of the street, where you have a concentration of children with special educational needs, of children from housing estates, of children whose parents don't necessarily have the time to contribute to the PTA or to do all of the things that most of us are able to do as parents. You have teachers who are far more stressed because they haven't got an even class of children, because we're splitting our children, segregating them socially. And you have teachers leaving the teaching profession in droves. Now, I declare again, my previous job to this was in an education union, and I've seen this at first hand. So first of all, we even have a segregation within the state system, not to mention the lack of resources that are being put into state system. And when you have adverts saying, if you want to be ahead within 4 years, come and join this school, I would be very suspicious of any teacher who planned to be ahead within 4 years. The issue with fee-paying schools is the access is exacerbated by our university system as well. It's exacerbated by those children who went to fee-paying schools being disproportionately represented in terms of Oxbridge entrance. Now we know that's a huge issue. We've just spoken about who holds the key positions in terms of senior journalists, in terms of judges, in terms of politicians, in terms of people who hold power in this country, not to mention bankers and financiers, etc. They, the majority, have gone to fee-paying schools and then predominantly off to Oxbridge as well. What the system sets up is a 2, 3 or 4 tier education system whereby, and you will find, as is happening with academies as well, is that fee-paying schools do not take in as many children with SEND. They don't have as much of a racial or any other spread, and that they are cherry-picking off those children, those families that can afford it and can afford to pay the fees. And that means that those children, we know from the research, have an absolutely unfair advantage going forward. And that stays with them for the rest of their lives. And because of other issues such as lack of inheritance tax and a whole range of other issues, that privilege cascades down. In terms of housing, if your parents have already have a house, you've had a good education, you go into a good profession, you then can afford to buy your own home. And so these are only a few of the ways in which education exacerbates that inequality gap.
Okay, I'm trying to move around the room.
I guess that made me curious about kind of what the representation in this room might be and what the representation of the Equality Trust membership might be. So I guess my question is whether the Equality Trust takes any action to listen to the voices of those who might be suffering most from the inequality.
That's a great question. It's a big part of our work. Many charities are now obviously talking about co-production, about working with their beneficiaries or working with people who are more affected. So our Young People's Project is a really good example of that. It's not a prescribed programme. We work with them and they decide what they want to explore and what they want to do, and that's been incredibly successful. In terms of the demographics of our supporters, I would say this is roughly quite representative. And I think it's true of volunteers in general. You know, the average age of a volunteer, and especially a trustee, is older. The average demographic is an older, middle-class person. And there are many reasons for that. I mean, again, because it takes time to do that. It takes time to be able to come to a meeting in the evening. You know, if you're a shift worker, it's not going to be as easy if you're working 9 to 5 or you're retired or whatever. And, you know, we value the contributions of all our supporters and all of our members because everybody... You know, the thing about inequality is we've all experienced it in very different ways, and our families experience it in ways, and you know, where we come from and who we are, it's all impacted by that. So as far as we're concerned, you know, we welcome everybody who wants to come and volunteer and do this work. What we are trying to do is to make sure that we can reach people who don't necessarily have the time to come to a meeting. I mean, you know, as a trade unionist, I have to say I never made it to the 6 o'clock meeting down at the pub. You know, it just wasn't going to happen for me. So what we have to do is go to where people are and speak to people where they are. And our Everyday Inequality project is another example of where we're trying to work with people to encourage them to speak about these issues. Because it's not always easy for people to just, you know, open up and admit, actually, you know, this has happened in my life. But what I really find is so rewarding about this work, and especially with the young people, is when you explain structural inequality to people, or when people arrive at that destination, and they realise that it's not their fault that, you know, they're living in an area that's perhaps got bad housing, or that their parents don't have a job, or, you know, it's not their fault. There's a lot about the system that's stacked against them. And although that can sound quite depressing, it's actually very liberating for people to not feel that stigma and to feel, okay, it doesn't have to be like this, so we can change it. And that's the journey we try and take people on, to say, yeah, things are bad and things are stacked against it, but there's a whole movement of people who want to change this. And as I say, you know, each time I see another poll, I feel like, you know, this tide is coming. It's really, we feel as if we're on the cusp of getting real change on this. And that, again, is really, really exciting.
Okay, we're on the left-hand side of the room.
Bring some equality for people who are on benefits, which is miserable enough to start with anyway, that reason why they might be on benefits. But if they're on benefits, they cannot then go and rent somewhere to live. It's against them every way. The landlords will not take anyone on benefits, so they're trying to be independent, they're trying to build steps, step out away from the miserable or the difficult things that brought them to be on benefits in the first place. And they can't get any accommodation. I don't know how that suddenly becomes your problem or our problem. I don't know what to do about it, and I don't know how to help anyone trying to do that. But it's certainly not an equality. It's an unequal place for if you are not on benefits, you can go and rent a house or a flat or an accommodation of some sort. If you are on benefits, you can't. So the landlords say no. You can look it up, you can ask the estate agents, oh yes, do come and have a look. But could you just ask the landlord if that would be allowed? Because I'm on benefits. No.
Sorry.
You can't, if you ask the estate agents who are helping the landlords, they say, yes, do come and have a look at the property, do go in and have a look. Yes, that'll be fine. And then you have to say, are you sure it will be fine? Because there's benefits involved here. And then the answer comes back, no, they don't want you. Bang. As if you work. That's it. Now that's a real situation for a lot of people. And I don't know where that comes into this equality trust. I don't know where it goes. I don't suppose you do either, but anyway, that's my question.
Okay, I'm going to do that delegation thing. Housing is such a huge issue, and it's so intertwined with all of these issues, and we've mentioned it a few times. The decision, it's part of the whole big universal credit fiasco, really, isn't it? When you change a system so that the landlord isn't being paid and the money is given to the person who's on welfare, you may be saying, that wonderful thing of we're giving people choice, but actually you're not giving people choice. You're breaking down a system that actually is working. And if you're faced with putting food on the table or buying a kid a new coat in the middle of winter or paying your rent, I know which one I would choose. And that is part of the universal credit campaigning that we're part of with other big organisations to try and get changes to universal credit. Housing is such a huge issue. It's not an area that we are directly campaigning on. There are plenty of other people in the field. But what we are trying to do, and what we are beginning to get a breakthrough with our partners in the third sector and charity organisations, is making sure that they understand the narrative of inequality and how it affects their issues, whether it's mental health, whether it's housing, whether it's education, whatever the subject is, that we are able to talk to them about the role that inequality plays, that we get a broader range of organisations campaigning against inequality and seeing that broader picture, that holistic picture, and not just going down these siloed routes. So I'm sorry I can't answer your question.
Don't worry, in the next section you will have your opportunity to share it, so don't worry. More questions?
Hello, thank you. I wanted to know what initiatives or projects, or whether it's local authority or grassroots or maybe even in another country, what projects have you seen that have really inspired you and made you excited about the work that you're doing?
Thanks. I think I keep coming back to it, but I really do think it's our young people's project. Because I'd had a very busy day to given evidence to the UN Special Rapporteur in the morning. Then there was a meeting of church investors that I went to speak at in the afternoon. And when I arrived in the evening at about 4 or 5 o'clock, wondering whether anybody was going to turn up. It's a whole bunch of young people. They're always going to have other things to do. And I walked into the room and I heard this absolute amazing chatter, and there were 25 young people, and I honest to God nearly burst into tears. I really did. It was so moving for me, because this was a piece of work that we couldn't get funded. We'd been to different funders. They'd said, this is great, this is inspirational, it's innovative, but no, we're not going to give you any money because you've never done anything like this before. And so we crowdfunded for it. We did, some of you may remember, we did the Big Give 2 years ago, and we raised £25,000. We did the Big Give last year and we raised £35,000. And this year, sorry, there has to be an advert and an ask. We're doing a big give which starts next Tuesday at noon, and for a whole week, whatever you donate will be doubled, plus we'll have gift aid as well. And so again, we're raising funds for our young people's work, because it was a question of, we know this, we need to do this, and the outcomes we've had from it. You know, these young people exhibited a piece of art in a really sort of fancy art gallery in Dorset in London, and you know, they've been on Radio 4, they've done a whole range of things, and we could never have predicted any of these outcomes. And that's the real benefit of just saying to people, what do you want to do? What do you feel strongly about? We'll support you. So for me, I think it's always got to be the Young People's Project.
Down the front.
It's kind of a twofold question. I was intrigued by your analysis about shops and how supermarkets charge more in their corner shops than they do in their central shops. And that combines with the disadvantage of privately or individually owned corner shops and village stores, thinking about our rural areas. What do you think we can do about that situation? And sort of combined with that, and thinking about the rural situation, what do you have to speak to the specific problems of rural inequalities?
I think that's a really fascinating aspect, because on the one hand, we'd all like to be very ethical in the way that we shop, you know, but realistically, we have to think of the finances as well. So we can't call out people for speaking at for shopping at particular shops when we know the products might not be ethically produced, when, you know, they might need a t-shirt that costs £2 because that's their budget. So it's a very, you know, it's a very prickly subject. So the decline of the high street obviously is an issue, and the decline of shops in rural areas as well. And you know, your village shop may charge you 20p more for a loaf of bread, but if you don't pay that, your local shop's going to go, and it provides a service for people who may not be able to get to town, etc. But it's also entwined with the environmental aspects of big out-of-town complexes as well. So again, all of these things are interconnected. We are currently working with a population health expert to start to look at rural inequality, because we haven't. It's not something. In order to start the project, we have to have funding to provide the staff time and the resources to do that. So our work happens when we have the sort of intersection of a good idea, some support and financial backing for it. So it's an area that we've started to discuss, because we've found a funder as well who will be interested in that. And so this is something that we would come back to you as a group and to some of our other groups that are in rural areas to inform us as to what you think are the key aspects of that. I mean, when I was at the Education Union, there was a report into rural inequality in terms of education. So touching on transport, touching on the closure of FE colleges, the amalgamation of FE colleges, schools, the effects of academies, all of these sorts of things. So to some extent, there's a little bit of work there that has been done in terms of education, but I certainly haven't looked at that, so I would really value having a conversation about that.
Okay, back.
Hi, my name's Tim. We were just discussing on our table about the political climate, and you've mentioned you've done some polls around equality and they're improving. We seem to be moving into a political move now at the moment where we've got a Tory government that's more right-wing than we've seen for years, and all the polls at the moment are looking like they're generating a bit of momentum at the moment, and we've got three other parties that are talking about equality and poverty, and the Tories, I think, mentioned poverty once in their manifesto. I suppose my question is, why have we still got turkeys voting for Christmas? Why don't people, what can you do to find out why people are still voting these organisations in. I mean, it's just curiosity. When you were talking, I just felt, how do we understand? Because the majority of people are suffering under what's happening at the moment, and we need to understand why they keep voting them back in.
Okay, when you said your burning questions, as a witchcraft historian, that did put the fear of God into me. There are lots of polls that show that people are against inequality, that people realise that inequality is damaging, and as we know, inequality damages all of us. Now, people at the top may not think that it damages them, but the evidence shows that it does. One of the things I think Brexit and various other events have shown us is that people are capable of believing conflicting ideals and having conflicting beliefs that are not necessarily logical. And just as economists, tend to say that we will react to a market and we will act in the most rational way, and I was saying this before, if there's anyone here who has acted in a totally rational way since the moment they were born, I'd really love to meet them. It's not the way the economy works, it's not the way that humans work. And in the same way, if we take an example from the British Attitudes Survey, the percentage of people who say that there's a high percentage of people that say that they agree with same-sex marriage. But there's also a high percentage of people who say that they think that LGBT relationships are wrong. So how do you square that? How do you square that? There's a difference, and we know this. And I heard someone saying this morning that, we thought racism had gone away. I was like, who thought racism had gone away? Ask any black person if they think racism has gone away. I can guarantee you what the answer is. The fact that we have a big dissonance between what we're allowed to say and what we actually think, I think is very dangerous. And so when you get people coming along who say the things actually you've been thinking for ages but you're just too scared to say because it wasn't polite to say it, it enables people to say those things. I'm being very roundabout in this way because I don't want to name any names, obviously, but I think you all know who I'm talking about. And I think what we have to realise is that people don't just look at the evidence and the logic and make a decision. There's a whole range of other factors that come into play. There's where people have traditionally lived, what their family have voted, what they think on one particular issue, which might skew what they think about everything else. There's whether they can be bothered to go and vote in the first place that day. There's a whole range of issues, so I think we're really, really in dangerous territory if we expect people to look at evidence, weigh it up, read all the manifestos and go, well, actually, I'm going to vote for this party. And it's the same problem with policy making. There's still a tendency to think if we put lots of money into research, we present that research and that evidence to the policymakers, they present it to government and they make the right decision based on the evidence. If that were the case, there'd be nobody left in the third sector campaigning. The difference between the evidence and the policy decisions is your power in between. Is the campaigning, is the MPs and the other policymakers and decision makers feeding that groundswell of public opinion? Now that works two ways. You then can get sort of government by Daily Mail opinion. So it's not necessarily, a good thing. But I think we have to, this is why Turkeys vote for Christmas. Because they like Christmas. But they somehow forget that they're on the menu.